Let's talk about something we rarely think about, yet we live inside it every day, the invisible contracts we sign with people. These contracts are not written down, they're not notarized or stamped. They're built silently through patterns, expectations, and unspoken rules. Every relationship we enter into, whether with a friend, a colleague, or even a family member, comes with these silent agreements. And toxic people, they are masters at exploiting them. They know exactly where the lines are blurry, where the silence can be twisted into consent, and where our kindness can be turned into obligation. Think about it. How often do we say yes when every part of us wants to say no? How often do we smile, nod, and swallow our discomfort just to keep the peace? Every time we do that, we are unintentionally signing a contract. We're saying, "This is okay. You can treat me this way." And once signed, these contracts are incredibly hard to break. Not because the other person won't let us, but because we don't realize that we are allowed to tear them up. The mental shift begins when we recognize that these contracts exist at all, because awareness is power. When we don't see them, we keep playing by rules that were never ours. But the moment we see clearly, when we notice the agreements we've entered unconsciously, we realize something profound. Permission was ours to give, and it is ours to withdraw. Let me give you an example. Imagine you have a friend who constantly calls you only when they need something. They never ask how you are. They never give back the same energy you give them. Over time, you've accepted this as part of the relationship. You've signed the contract that says you can take and I will give. But the day you pause, the day you decide not to answer that call, or the day you respond differently, you're rewriting the terms. You're saying, "No, I no longer agree to this contract." And here's the thing, healthy people will respect that. Toxic people will resist it, because they benefit from the old agreement. It's not always easy. Some of these contracts are years, even decades, in the making. Sometimes we signed them when we didn't know better, when we thought love meant sacrifice, or when we believed our worth was measured by how much we could endure. But we're not the same people anymore. We've grown, we've learned, and with growth comes the right, the responsibility to renegotiate or walk away from contracts that no longer honor us. Philosophically, it's about reclaiming agency. We cannot control who someone chooses to be, but we can control what we agree to. And the beauty of this realization is that it puts us back in the driver's seat. Instead of feeling trapped by someone's toxic behavior, we recognize that we've been holding the keys all along. This shift doesn't mean cutting people out impulsively. It means becoming deeply conscious of what we are saying yes to and asking ourselves, does this agreement honor my dignity? Does it reflect the kind of life I want to live? Does it respect the person I am becoming? And if the answer is no, then we have the right, no, the duty, to change it. Because here's the truth. Toxic people can only continue patterns that we unconsciously permit. Once we awaken to the fact that we are participants in those patterns, we gain the courage to step out of them. And when we do, we stop being victims of invisible contracts and start becoming authors of visible choices. And that is the most powerful shift of all, to realize that we do not need permission to revoke permission. When we think about toxic people, we often focus on what they say, what they do, how they behave. But here's the truth. What really matters is not what leaves their mouth, but what enters our mind. The power of their words, their criticism, their manipulation does not come from them alone. It comes from the meaning we attach to it. And this is where the real shift happens, reclaiming ownership of interpretation. Let me explain. Two people can hear the same sentence and walk away with completely different experiences. A colleague says, "You're late again," One person hears it as an attack on their character. I am unreliable, I am incompetent. Another person hears it as simple information. Yes, I arrived after the agreed time. The words are the same, but the meaning is different. Why? Because meaning doesn't live in the speaker. It lives in the listener. Toxic people know this, whether consciously or instinctively. They throw words like darts, hoping one will pierce your skin. But darts only hurt if you stand still and accept that they're meant for you. What if you chose to reinterpret? What if, instead of absorbing every negative remark as truth, you saw it as a reflection of the other person's state of mind? Their frustration, their insecurity, their chaos. You begin to see that what comes out of them belongs to them. It does not automatically define you. We often forget that interpretation is a choice. We think the meaning is delivered with the words, like a package that arrives sealed. But in reality, the package is empty until we decide what to put inside. The insult, the criticism, the guilt trip. It only becomes poison when we swallow it. And when we refuse, when we say, I will decide what this means for me, suddenly the poison loses its power. This doesn't mean denial. It doesn't mean pretending people's behavior doesn't hurt. It means placing ourselves in the position of authority over our inner world. It's about asking, what am I going to do with this? Will I take it as truth, or will I filter it through the lens of my own worth? That choice is where freedom lies. And yes, this is difficult, especially when the toxic person is someone close to us. Their words carry weight because we love them, or because we respect them, or because we've built history together. But love does not require us to surrender interpretation. Respect does not demand that we swallow everything whole. If anything, real self-respect begins when we separate who we are from what others say about us. Think about it like this. If someone hands you a heavy bag and insists it's yours, you have two options. You can take it and carry the weight, or you can look inside, see that it doesn't belong to you, and hand it back. Reclaiming interpretation is exactly that. It's choosing not to carry what isn't yours. This mental shift is profoundly liberating because it breaks the chain of control. Toxic people thrive when they can predict our reactions, when they know their words will land and wound. But when we reclaim interpretation, we become unpredictable. Their sharpest comments fall flat, their manipulation doesn't stick. And without fuel, the fire of their toxicity burns out. So the next time someone tries to define you with their words, remember, you are the author, not the audience. You get to write the meaning, you get to decide the story. And the moment you reclaim that power, no voice outside of you can ever be louder than the voice within you. If there is one thing toxic people rely on, it is your reaction. They thrive on it. They poke, they provoke, they plant words in ways that ignite anger, guilt, or defensiveness. And each time you react, you give them what they came for. Your energy, your attention, your power. That is how the cycle sustains itself. They push, you respond, and the dance continues. But here's the profound shift. What if you stepped out of the dance? What if you stopped feeding the cycle? Reaction is automatic. It comes from old wiring, our need to defend ourselves, to prove we are right, to show we are not weak. But this instinct, while human, becomes a trap in the presence of toxicity. The more you react, the more ammunition you provide. Your raised voice, your long explanations, your emotional exhaustion, it all fuels the very behavior you wish to end. Now imagine breaking that pattern. Imagine choosing not to react but to respond, or sometimes not to respond at all. That silence, that pause, that refusal to hand over your emotional energy becomes your greatest act of strength. Because stillness is not weakness, it is control, it says, I will not let you decide how I feel. I will not dance to the tune you're playing. We must understand that not every battle deserves our presence. Not every accusation requires a defense. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing, and that silence is not passive, it is deeply active. It is a decision, a reclaiming of choice. Let me give you an image. Think of toxic words as sparks. Every time they fall on you, you have two choices. You can throw oil, your anger, your defensiveness, your long justifications, and the fire grows wild. Or you can remain still, offer no fuel, and the spark dies quietly on its own. That is what breaking the cycle looks like. You become fireproof not because you stop feeling, but because you stop feeding. And yes, I know, it is not easy. Silence feels unnatural when someone attacks us. Calm feels impossible when someone presses our deepest wounds. But mastery lies in the pause, in teaching yourself that your emotions are yours, not theirs to command. The pause is a shield. It gives you space to choose a response that serves you, not one that serves their toxicity. It is a shift from living on autopilot to living with intention. Instead of being dragged into their storm, you stand firmly in your own ground. Instead of matching their chaos with your chaos, you bring clarity. And with time, this shift does something remarkable. Toxic people realize they cannot pull you like a puppet anymore. They lose control, not because you fought harder, but because you stopped playing. And let's be clear, this is not about suppressing yourself. It is not about swallowing your truth or avoiding confrontation when it's necessary. It's about recognizing that not every arrow fired at you deserves to be caught. Some can simply fall to the ground. That choice saves your energy for the battles that truly matter, the conversations that lead to growth, and the relationships that deserve your investment. Because here's the truth. The cycle ends not when they change, but when you do. And the most radical change you can make is to stop being predictable, to stop giving the very reactions that feed their power. The moment you learn to pause, to breathe, to withhold the fuel they crave, you don't just break the cycle. You end it. We often think of boundaries as lines we draw outside of ourselves, what we allow others to say, how close we let them come, what behavior we will or will not tolerate. And yes, external boundaries matter, but the truth is, the strongest boundaries are not the ones people can see. They are the ones we build inside, internal boundaries, the quiet lines of discipline and dignity that protect us long before anyone else gets the chance to cross them. Because here's the reality, toxic people will always test limits. They will push against your no. They will challenge your silence. They will look for cracks in the wall. And if your only defense is what you try to control outside, you will find yourself exhausted, constantly patching holes, constantly explaining, constantly fighting. But when your boundaries are rooted inside, when you have decided what you will not allow yourself to believe, what stories you will not carry, what dignity you will never surrender, then no matter how hard they push, they cannot move you. Think of it like this. An external boundary says, "You cannot speak to me like that." But an internal boundary says, "Even if you do, I will not believe it defines me." One protects the surface, the other protects the soul, and that inner protection is where the real strength lies. So much of the pain we experience in toxic dynamics is not only about what people do to us, it is about what we do to ourselves afterward. We replay their words, we internalize their blame, we question our worth. We write stories in our own minds that keep the wound alive long after the moment has passed. Internal boundaries stop that spiral. They interrupt the inner voice that says, maybe they're right, maybe I deserve this, and replace it with, no, this is not mine to carry. And this shift is not just psychological, it is deeply philosophical, because it forces us to ask, who do I belong to? Do I belong to the shifting moods and opinions of others, or do I belong to myself, to my values, my truth, my dignity? Internal boundaries are an act of belonging to yourself. They remind you that your worth is not a negotiation. Of course, holding these boundaries takes practice. It requires courage to say no not only to others, but also to yourself. To say no to the parts of you that crave approval, to the temptation of over-explaining, to the urge to keep the peace at the cost of your own peace. Internal boundaries are not built in a day. They are built in moments. Every time you choose self-respect over self-doubt, every time you choose stillness over reaction, every time you choose to walk away instead of getting pulled in, you strengthen that inner line. And once that line becomes clear inside you, toxic people lose their power, because they can shout, they can criticize, they can project, but they cannot get in. You are no longer negotiating your value at their table. You are standing firmly at your own. The truth is, external boundaries keep people at a distance. Internal boundaries keep you at peace. And peace is the one thing toxic people cannot touch unless you hand it over. So remember this, the strongest wall you will ever build is not the one that keeps others out, but the one that keeps your dignity in. One of the most liberating realizations you will ever have in life is this: not everything handed to you belongs to you. Toxic people are experts at giving away what they cannot carry. Their guilt, their blame, their insecurities, not because it isn't present. They project their inner storms onto others, and before we know it, we are walking around carrying weight that isn't ours. We take responsibility for their moods, we feel guilty for their unhappiness, we question ourselves because of their accusations. And all of this happens because we fail to stop and ask one essential question: does this belong to me? Imagine someone standing in front of you with a heavy bag. They drop it at your feet and say, "This is yours." Without thinking, you pick it up and start walking with it. But the truth is, it was never yours, it was theirs all along. This is how toxicity works. It convinces you that the problem is you, so that you will carry what they cannot bear. But once you begin to recognize this pattern, you realize you have a choice. You can look at that heavy bag and say, "No, this does not belong to me," and leave it where it is. This is not about denying responsibility for your own actions. It's about clarity. It's about drawing a line between what is genuinely yours to work on and what is someone else's projection. If you have hurt someone, own it. If you have made a mistake, repair it. That is your responsibility. But if someone is asking you to fix their emptiness, to absorb their anger, to carry their shame, that is not your burden to hold. The danger of taking on what isn't yours is that it slowly erodes your sense of self. You begin to see yourself through the distorted mirror of someone else's pain. Their insecurity becomes your self-doubt. Their blame becomes your guilt. Their chaos becomes your constant anxiety. And over time, you lose sight of what is truly yours. That is why the mental shift here is so powerful. It is the reclaiming of ownership over your emotional life. Philosophically, this comes down to the idea of responsibility versus ownership. You are responsible for what you choose, how you act, and what you nurture within yourself. You are not responsible for the wounds someone refuses to heal, the anger they refuse to release, the shadows they refuse to face. To carry what is not yours is to abandon what is. And what is yours, your growth, your peace, your dignity, requires your full attention. The moment you begin to separate the two, something shifts inside you. You no longer feel the need to apologize for things you didn't do. You no longer shrink under accusations that have nothing to do with your truth. You begin to see toxic behavior for what it is, a reflection of the other person's unresolved struggles, not a verdict on your worth. And in that clarity you find freedom. So, when you feel the weight of someone else's blame pressing down on you, pause. Ask yourself, does this belong to me? If the answer is no, then lay it down, refuse to carry it. because life is heavy enough carrying what is truly yours. You do not need to be weighed down by burdens that were never meant for you. The real power lies in this simple act of discernment, knowing what belongs to you and what doesn't. And once you master that, no one, not even the most toxic person, can make you their carrier again. There comes a point when you realize that the most powerful thing you can bring into a toxic interaction is not an argument, not evidence, not even anger. It is presence. Calm, steady, unshaken presence, because toxic people thrive on battle. They lure you into defending yourself, explaining yourself, fighting for your worth. And as long as you are fighting, you are trapped in their game. But when you choose presence over battle, the entire dynamic changes. Presence is not passive. It is not resignation. It is strength anchored in stillness. It is the quiet confidence that says, I do not need to convince you of who I am. I know it already. And this unnerves toxic people, because their greatest weapon is your need to be understood, your need to prove, your need to win. When you remove that need, you remove their power. Think about it. Every battle requires two participants. A fight cannot exist if only one person shows up ready to swing. By refusing to enter the ring, you are not giving up. You are rising above. You are saying, I choose my peace over your chaos. I choose my dignity over this dispute. And that choice is not weakness. It is wisdom. This is where all the previous shifts come together. Recognizing invisible contracts, reclaiming interpretation, breaking the cycle of reaction, building internal boundaries, and discerning what belongs to you. All of it prepares you for this final step, choosing presence, because presence is not built overnight. It is the fruit of every other boundary, every other choice, every other moment you decided to honor yourself over the pull of toxicity. And let's be honest, choosing presence is not easy. Sometimes silence feels unbearable. Sometimes walking away feels like surrender. But here's the paradox. The real surrender is when you let toxic people drag you into endless battles that never change. Presence, on the other hand, is strength without noise. It is a quiet refusal to be moved, a gentle but firm declaration that your peace is not up for negotiation. Philosophically, presence is about living in alignment with your truth rather than in reaction to someone else's chaos. It's about saying, I don't need to fight for my place is already mine. And when you embody that, something extraordinary happens. The toxicity around you begins to lose oxygen. Arguments fall flat, manipulation feels empty. Even cruelty loses its sting, because the battle can only continue if you keep showing up for it. So, the next time you feel yourself pulled into that familiar tug-of-war, pause. Ask yourself, what am I fighting for? Do I really need to prove this, or can my calm, steady presence speak louder than any defense I could ever make? That pause is not weakness, it is clarity. And clarity is the language of freedom. Because in the end, toxic people do not fear your anger. They do not fear your words. They fear your calm. They fear the moment you stop playing. They fear the silence that tells them their power is gone. So remember this. The most powerful way to stop toxicity in its tracks is not to fight harder, but to stand taller. Not to shout louder, but to grow quieter. Not to enter the battle, but to embody a presence that says, I am untouchable. And when you learn to do that, you discover the truth that peace is not found when the world becomes quieter. Peace is found when you do.